The click of Karen Matthews's pen was a punctuation mark of pure, theatrical authority. It landed on the formica tabletop of the community clubhouse with a sharp crack, a sound engineered to command silence. It worked. The desultory murmur of the 20 or so homeowners present at the Oak Creek Preserve Homeowners Association's monthly board meeting died instantly. "Item 4, Karen announced, her voice a finely honed instrument of pleasant, unyielding condescension. "Architectural compliance. Mr. Jensen." David Jensen felt a familiar, dull pressure begin to build behind his ribs. He had known this was coming. He kept his expression neutral, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He was an architect, a man who built his life and career on precision, on the clear and unambiguous language of blueprints and building codes. To him, the HOA's CC&Rs were just another set of specifications, tedious, often arbitrary, but ultimately knowable. It was the interpretation of those specifications that had become the problem. "David," Karen said, her smile a perfect pleasant crescent that did not reach her eyes. "It has been noted during the last architectural review walkthrough that the paint on your mailbox is fading." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. This was the third consecutive meeting where David's property had been the subject of Karen's laser-like focus. "The color," she continued, consulting a sheet on her ever-present clipboard, "appears to have degraded from the approved Sherwin-Williams tricorn black SW625 to a shade more closely resembling a charcoal or perhaps a weathered graphite." David met her gaze. He refused to be baited into an emotional display. That was her arena. And he was not a performer. "Karen," he said, his voice even and measured, as we discussed via email on October 3rd. "The mailbox is the original, board-approved model installed by the builder. The covenants, specifically Article 6, Section 2, address unapproved alterations. They do not, however, contain any provision regarding natural material degradation due to solar exposure." He didn't need to look at the documents. He had memorized the relevant passages. He knew the battlefield better than she did. Karen's smile tightened by a millimeter. "As I'm sure you're aware, David, Article 9 gives the board broad discretion in matters of aesthetic uniformity. A faded mailbox detracts from the cohesive visual narrative of our community. The cohesive visual narrative also includes trees that shed their leaves in the fall and grass that turns brown in the winter." David countered gently. "Nature, much like paint, is subject to entropy, unless the board intends to issue violations for the changing of the seasons. I believe my mailbox falls squarely within the bounds of acceptable wear." A nervous titter ran through the room. Checkmate. He had used her own pseudo-intellectual jargon against her. Karen's eyes flashed. A brief, hot spark of fury before the placid mask of the concerned community leader slid back into place. "Your perspective is noted," she said. The words clipped. She made a meaningless notation on her clipboard. "We'll table the discussion for now, pending further review." It was a retreat, not a surrender, and they both knew it. As the meeting droned on with debates over holiday decoration timelines and the perennial problem of pet waste, David felt a cold knot of apprehension. This wasn't about a mailbox. It had never been about the mailbox, or the placement of his recycling bin 2 months ago, or the supposedly overgrown azalea bush before that. Those were skirmishes. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Karen was searching for the main battlefield, and he knew exactly where she would find it. He drove home under a sky bruised with the last vestiges of twilight. He turned onto his street, Maple Drive, a tidy ribbon of asphalt lined with identical, well-maintained homes, each a testament to the power of the Oak Creek Preserve HOA. He pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. But he didn't move to get out. Instead, he looked past his perfectly manicured lawn, past the dark windows of his quiet house, to the backyard. Through the slats of the fence, he could see the cool, placid blue of the water, shimmering under the soft glow of the landscape lighting. The pool. It was more than a feature of his property. It was a monument. He and his wife, Evelyn, had designed it together in the last year of her life. She had been the artist, he the architect. She had sketched the gentle curve of the tanning ledge on a restaurant napkin, her hand already showing the slight tremor she tried so hard to hide. He had translated her vision into technical drawings, specifying the PSI of the concrete and the flow rate of the pumps. It was their final collaboration, a sanctuary of memory built of stone and water. Every tile, every paver, was imbued with a sense of her, after she was gone. Sitting by its edge in the quiet of the morning, coffee in hand, was the closest he could get to a conversation with her. It was a sacred space, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that it was about to be desecrated by a courtesy notice. Later that night, the phone buzzed on his kitchen counter. It was his sister, Sarah. "So, how was the circus?" she asked. Her voice, always pragmatic, was a welcome anchor. "Enlightening," David said. Leaning against the cool granite, we spent 10 minutes debating the existential angst of my mailbox. Sarah sighed. She was a paralegal, and she'd heard enough HOA horror stories to fill a law library. Karen Matthews again. "I presume, David, you need to be careful. Women like that don't just wield power, they identify with it. A challenge to her authority is a challenge to her very being. It's just a mailbox." "Sarah, it's never just a mailbox," she countered immediately. "It's a test. She's probing for weakness. You need to start a file. Now. Not tomorrow. A file, she repeated firmly. "Buy a binder. Create a folder on your computer. Document everything, every email, every conversation, every passive-aggressive note she leaves on your door. Log the date, the time, and a summary of what was said. Scan every piece of paper. If she says hello to you on the street, write it down. It sounds paranoid. But if this escalates, and I promise you, it will, your meticulous records will be your only shield. The system is all they have, so you have to know the system better than they do." He looked out the window towards the pool, its surface a placid, unblemished mirror reflecting the night sky. Sarah was right. The mailbox was just the opening salvo. Karen's war was coming, and his sanctuary was her target. October 12th. The envelope was tucked neatly behind the faded black door of his mailbox. It was crisp, white, and bore the official logo of the Oak Creek Preserve Homeowners Association. It wasn't a bill for dues. David's stomach tightened as he carried it inside, the paper cool and heavy in his hand. He slid it open with a letter opener from his desk, the one Evelyn had given him, shaped like a miniature drafting T-square. The letterhead was formal, the tone deceptively polite. It was a courtesy notice. "Dear Mr. Jensen, this letter serves as a friendly reminder regarding the covenants, conditions and restrictions CC&Rs that help maintain the aesthetic quality and property values within our community. It has come to the attention of the Board of Directors that the swimming pool located on your property may not be in full compliance with our governing documents. Specifically, we would like to draw your attention to CC&R for 8.4.2 Aesthetic Nuisance and Community Rule 12.1 Preservation of Community Harmony. These articles state that all property features, whether temporary or permanent, must not be visually disruptive or detract from the uniform character of the neighborhood. David read the sentences again. Visually disruptive. Uniform character. The language was so deliberately, infuriatingly vague as to be meaningless. His pool was a standard in-ground design, invisible from the street, shielded by a 6-foot privacy fence that was itself HOA approved. How could it possibly be visually disruptive? The notice ended with a familiar, cloying politeness. We are confident this is a simple misunderstanding and look forward to your prompt action to resolve the matter. Please contact the management company within 10 business days to discuss your plan for bringing the property into compliance. There it was. The declaration of war. Not a shot fired in anger, but a quiet, procedural maneuver, wrapped in the guise of a friendly reminder. He placed the letter on his desk, then walked to the large window overlooking the backyard. The pool was still, its surface a perfect cerulean blue under the afternoon sun. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was Evelyn's last gift to him. And Karen Matthews was trying to take it away. He picked up his phone and called Sarah. "It started," he said, his voice low and tight. "I got the notice. The pool." He heard the soft click of her keyboard. "Okay. David, don't panic. And absolutely do not fire back an angry email. What exactly does it say?" He read the letter to her, his voice dripping with incredulous anger. "Aesthetic nuisance. Community harmony, Sarah. It's a hole in the ground filled with water. It's surrounded by a fence. What is she even talking about?" "It doesn't matter what she's talking about," Sarah said calmly. "The vagueness is the point. It's a hook. She wants you to get angry, to call her up and yell. She wants you to be emotional so she can be procedural. Don't give her the satisfaction. You're going to respond politely, professionally, and in writing. You're going to schedule a meeting, and you're going to listen. Remember what I said. Know the system." David took a deep breath. The architect in him reasserting control over the grieving husband. She was right. This wasn't a fight to be won with passion. It was a structure to be dismantled, piece by logical piece. "Okay," he said, his resolve hardening. "Let's get the binder." October 19th. The meeting was held in the same soulless clubhouse, but this time the audience consisted of a single, disinterested observer, Liam, a junior property manager from All Pro Community Management, whose youthful face betrayed a profound desire to be anywhere else. He sat with a laptop, occasionally typing a note, but his primary function seemed to be to serve as a witness and a buffer. Karen, however, was in her element. She sat opposite David at the long table, her hands folded neatly on top of a pristine copy of the CC&Rs, tabbed with colorful plastic markers. "Thank you for meeting with us. David," she began, her tone drenched in false magnanimity. "We always prefer to resolve these matters amicably, as neighbors." David nodded, keeping his expression impassive. "I'm happy to clarify any misunderstanding. Karen, but I have to admit, I'm at a loss. The courtesy notice was quite vague. Can you please specify which aspect of my pool is considered an aesthetic nuisance?" Karen leaned forward, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "It's not about the pool itself. David, it's a beautiful pool. Truly. The issue is its location. It infringes upon the view corridor easement." David felt a flicker of confusion. "The what?" "The view corridor," she repeated, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "It's a foundational principle of Oak Creek Preserve's design. The homes on the upper slope, on Ridgecrest Lane, were sold with the promise of a scenic vista over the lower portion of the neighborhood. Your property, and specifically your pool, obstructs that vista, the constant shimmer of the water, the blueness of it all. It creates a visual disruption. David stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of the argument. His house was separated from the homes on Ridgecrest Lane by 2 other properties and a dense stand of mature pine trees that was designated as a common area. Karen, no one on Ridgecrest can see my pool. They can't even see my house. There's a forest in the way. Not according to the original site plans, she countered smoothly, tapping a finger on her binder. There is a designated corridor, and even if the trees have grown in, the principle remains. The CC&Rs are very clear. She opened her copy to a pre-marked page and slid it across the table. She had highlighted a single sentence. All properties shall be maintained to preserve community harmony and aesthetic appeal. That sentence doesn't mention view corridors, David said flatly. It's a general statement on aesthetics. Interpretation is the purview of the board, Karen said, her smile unwavering. And the board interprets this to include the protection of our community's scenic vistas. Liam, the property manager, cleared his throat. The board's interpretation is generally given significant deference in these matters. Mr. Jensen. David could see the trap closing. It was a labyrinth of circular logic. The rule was whatever Karen said it was, because she was the board. And the board had the power of interpretation. He had hoped for a rational discussion, but this was a performance. So, what is the proposed solution? David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Do you expect me to fill in my pool plant taller trees on my own property to block a view that doesn't exist? We're not unreasonable, Karen said, leaning back in her chair. A tasteful lattice screen. Perhaps, or some mature, fast-growing evergreen plantings along the back fence line. Something to soften the visual impact. She was telling him to spend thousands of dollars to hide his pool from a non-existent line of sight, to appease a non-existent rule. It was then that he understood. This wasn't about a view. It was a power play, pure and simple. She had found her battlefield, and she was digging her trenches. I will take your recommendation under advisement, David said, his tone as formal and cold as hers. He stood up. Thank you for your time. He walked out of the clubhouse without a backward glance. The pressure behind his ribs, now a steady, burning fire. The pretense of neighborly discussion was over. 2 days later, the certified letter arrived. It required his signature. Inside was the formal violation notice. It cited the same spurious articles and the fictional view corridor easement. It detailed a fine of $100, with an additional $50 for each week. The violation remained uncorrected, and it contained a date for a formal hearing before the full Board of Directors, November 2nd, 7:00 p.m. He scanned the letter and placed it carefully in the binder Sarah had told him to create. The file was getting thicker. October 22nd. She's inventing easements. Now Sarah's voice crackled with indignation over the phone. David, this is beyond harassment. This is fabrication. The property manager just nodded along like she was quoting scripture, David said, pacing the length of his office. He said the board's interpretation is given significant deference. Deference isn't absolute, and it doesn't cover pulling legal concepts out of thin air. Sarah shot back. Okay. New plan. We're done being reactive. It's time to go on the offensive. But quietly. You need to formally request, in writing, all official HOA documents, board meeting minutes for the last 5 years, current financials, and a certified copy of the complete, up-to-date governing documents, CC&Rs, bylaws, and all rules and regulations. Send it to the management company via certified mail. They are legally obligated to provide them within a certain time frame. We need to see when and how this view corridor idea ever came up. And what if it's not in there? David asked. Then we have her. But that's just step one. You need to prove, unequivocally, what is and is not on your property. You need an expert. Sarah paused. Wait a minute. What about old Mr. Gable Arthur? Didn't you say he used to be a surveyor for the county? David stopped pacing. Arthur Gable lived 3 doors down. He was a widower in his late 70s, known for his immaculately tended rose bushes and his perpetually grumpy demeanor. He and his late wife, Eleanor, had been the target of a years-long campaign by Karen over the precise shade of their front door. I don't know. Sarah. He's not exactly the friendly type. He hates Karen Matthews. That's all the friendly you need. Go talk to him. David. An enemy of your enemy is, at the very least, a valuable consultant. David found Arthur Gable on his knees in his front garden, mercilessly pruning a defiant rosebush. He was a small, wiry man with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes that had seen too many poorly drawn property lines. David explained the situation, carefully and concisely, laying out the violation notice and Karen's claim about a view corridor easement. Arthur grunted, not looking up from his work. View corridor, on Maple Drive. That woman's got more fiction in her than the public library. There's no view corridor. Never has been. That's what I thought. But she insists it's in the original site plans. David said. Arthur finally stopped pruning and looked up, his eyes narrowing. The plans she has are copies of copies, probably downloaded from the developer's 20-year-old marketing website. You want the truth. You don't get it from the HOA. You get it from the source. County Recorder's Office. The official plat maps are filed there. They're public record. Can't be changed. Can't be interpreted. They either show an easement or they don't. He stood up, wiping his dirt-caked hands on his trousers. I've got nothing better to do. Pick me up tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. This sounds more interesting than aphids. The next day, the sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the county recorder's office felt like a world away from Oak Creek Preserve. Arthur moved with a familiar purpose, navigating the labyrinth of file cabinets and microfilm readers. He pulled a large, bound volume from a shelf and carried it to a wide table, opening it to a specific page. Here we are, he grumbled, his finger tracing a line on the yellowed paper, Oak Creek Preserve, Phase 2. He unrolled a massive, crisp blueprint, the official, stamped, and recorded plat map of their section of the neighborhood. David leaned in, his architect's eye quickly making sense of the dense web of lines and numbers. Arthur's finger landed on Lot 42, David's property. Now, look close, Arthur instructed, pointing with the tip of a pen. You see this dotted line running along your back property line, 10 feet wide. David nodded. I see it. That, Arthur said with grim satisfaction, is an easement. See the notation? He pointed to a block of text. PUE, Public Utility Easement. It's for the power lines and the sewer main. It is the only easement recorded on your lot. They scanned the entire document. There was no mention of a view corridor, no scenic easement, no restriction on construction within the property's building envelope beyond the standard setbacks. Arthur leaned back, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. Well, that's not right, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It appears Karen Matthews's memory of the original site plans is creatively enhanced. The easement she's citing doesn't exist. It's a ghost. David felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the smoking gun. A certified copy of this map would obliterate her central argument. When David got home, a thick manila envelope from All Pro Community Management was waiting for him. The documents he had requested. He spread the meeting minutes across his dining room table. He found the minutes from the meeting 3 years ago where, according to Karen, the board had clarified the application of the aesthetic nuisance rule. He stared at the page. The agenda item was there, but the body of the text describing the discussion and the subsequent vote was completely blacked out. A thick, digital bar of redaction concealed the truth. He immediately sent a picture to Sarah. Her reply came a minute later. "This is a bad sign. A very bad sign. It means they're hiding the process, not just the outcome. Whatever happened in that meeting. They know it doesn't help their case. David, this isn't just about Karen's harassment anymore. This is starting to look like potential fraud." The binder on his desk now held a ghost easement and a phantom vote. The foundations of Karen's case were built on sand, and David now had the tools to prove it. October 28th. The first retaliatory strike came on a Monday morning. It was another white envelope, this time left conspicuously taped to his front door. It was a formal violation notice, no courtesy this time for excessive noise. Violation of Rule 7.3. The operation of pool pump equipment is creating a humming noise audible from the common area, constituting a noise nuisance. David walked to his pool equipment, which was tucked neatly behind a lattice screen on the side of his house. The pump was running. It emitted a low, steady hum, quieter than the air conditioner on his neighbor's house. He pulled out his phone, opened a decibel meter app, and held it a foot from the pump. 52 decibels, the equivalent of a quiet conversation. He walked to the edge of his property line bordering the common area. The meter read 38 decibels, barely above the ambient noise of birds chirping. It was absurd. It was harassment. And it was just the beginning. 3 days later, another notice appeared. Violation of Architectural Standard 4.1. The rear privacy fence exceeds the maximum approved height of 6 feet 72 inches by approximately 1/4, 0.25 of an inch in one section. The next day, a third. Violation of Safety Rule 9.5. Improper storage of pool chemicals. A chlorine tablet dispenser was observed floating in the pool during daylight hours, which could be visually distracting to neighbors. The notices were a flurry of paper cuts, each one designed to annoy, to exhaust, to bury him in a bureaucratic avalanche. It was a classic bully tactic. If you can't win the main argument, create a dozen smaller ones to distract and overwhelm your opponent. Worse than the letters, however, was the whisper campaign. He started to notice a change in the neighborhood. A few neighbors who were usually friendly now offered only a tight-lipped nod as he passed. At the community mailbox, he overheard one of Karen's allies, a woman from the social committee, talking in a hushed but carrying voice. Such a shame. He just refuses to be a team player. All that lovely green space behind his house. And Karen was just trying to preserve the view for everyone. Some people are so selfish. It really hurts our property values when one person just ignores the rules. The narrative had been set. He was the problem. The uncooperative, selfish homeowner who was single-handedly dragging down the cohesive visual narrative of Oak Creek Preserve. The pressure was mounting, a slow, crushing weight on his chest. The fight was taking a toll, seeping into his work, his sleep. His sanctuary had become a source of profound anxiety. He found Mrs. Gable, Arthur's wife, tending her own garden one afternoon. She was a gentle woman in her 70s, with kind eyes that held a hint of sadness. Karen had targeted her for years over a small, decorative fence around her flower bed that was technically non-compliant with a rule passed long after it was installed. "Don't let her get to you, David," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "Her power comes from fear. She makes people afraid of the fines, of the letters, of being singled out at the meetings. Most people just give in. It's easier. But you're not giving in. And that's making her desperate. She looked at him directly. You fight her. But you fight clean. You use the truth. It's the only thing people like her can't twist. Her words were a balm, a reminder of the moral high ground. But that evening, the final piece of Karen's campaign of intimidation arrived. It was another certified letter. Notice of intent to file a lion. The legal language was stark and brutal. It stated that if the fines assessed at the upcoming hearing on November 2nd were not paid in full within 30 days, the association would place a lien on his property. A lien was a serious legal action, a cloud on his title that could prevent him from selling or refinancing his home. It was the HOA's nuclear option. He held the paper in his hand, the threat now tangible and terrifying. This was no longer about a mailbox or a view. It was about his home. The home he had built with Evelyn. The quiet anger that had been simmering for weeks now coalesced into something cold, hard, and resolute. Karen had made a critical mistake. She thought she was burying him in paper, but she was only giving him more evidence. November 2nd, 6:55 p.m. The community clubhouse was packed, a standing room-only theater for the evening's main event. The air was thick with a mixture of cheap coffee, neighborhood gossip, and palpable tension. David saw the faces of his neighbors, their expressions ranging from curious and sympathetic to hostile and judgmental. Karen had successfully divided the community, turning his private dispute into a public spectacle. He sat at the defendant's table, his sister Sarah in the chair beside him. She wasn't there to speak, but her calm, steady presence was an anchor. On his laptop, his presentation was loaded and ready. In his binder lay the certified plat map and the unredacted meeting minutes, which he'd finally obtained after filing a formal state records request that bypassed the management company entirely. At the head table sat the 5 board members. Karen was in the center, radiating an aura of supreme confidence. To her right sat Liam, the property manager, looking pale and nervous. On a large screen behind them, a digital timer was projected in stark red numbers, 05 WORO, the time allotted for homeowner comments. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Karen struck a small gavel. The room fell silent. The board now calls to order the hearing regarding violation notice, FI 2023-114, issued to the property at 42 Maple Drive. She announced. She gave a brief, biased summary of the situation, portraying herself as a reluctant enforcer of rules designed to protect the collective good, and David as a stubborn outlier. Mr. Jensen has been given multiple opportunities to resolve this matter amicably, she concluded, her voice full of feigned regret. He has chosen this public forum instead. Mr. Jensen, you have 5 minutes to present your case. The timer started its relentless countdown. 05 WO0, 04:59. David stood, connected his laptop to the projector, and took a calm, centering breath. He clicked the first slide into place. Slide 1 or 4:55, a crisp, high-resolution scan of the formal violation notice appeared on the screen. The title read, Clarification of Violation Notice. VI 2023-114. Good evening, David began, his voice amplified slightly by the microphone. It was steady, devoid of anger. The matter before us is a violation notice citing my pool as an aesthetic nuisance that infringes upon a view corridor easement. My purpose this evening is not to argue, but to present the documented facts of the case. Slide 2:04:30. He advanced to the next slide. It showed a screenshot of Karen's email to him, the one with the single highlighted sentence. Board's justification, CCNR article, Fire 8.4.2. The board's justification for this violation rests on a single sentence. All properties shall be maintained to preserve community harmony and aesthetic appeal. This sentence has been presented as the sole basis for the violation. Slide 3, 0345 click. The next slide showed the same page from the CC&Rs. But now, the entire paragraph was visible. A section at the end was highlighted in bright yellow. The full context. However, David continued, letting the words on the screen sink in. The full text of that article, which was omitted from the board's correspondence, concludes with the following crucial clause. This provision is subordinate to all recorded municipal and county zoning ordinances, protecting the rights of private property owners regarding improvements constructed entirely within the boundaries of their deeded lot. A low murmur rippled through the room. He had established, in under 90 seconds, that Karen had selectively quoted the governing documents to misrepresent their intent. Slide 40300, click. A detailed, official document filled the screen. The official county plat map. A red arrow pointed to his lot. The second justification cited was a view corridor easement. This is the official, certified plat map for my property, obtained from the county recorder's office. He used the laser pointer to trace the only dotted line on his lot. As you can see, the only easement recorded on Lot 42 is a public utility easement for power and sewer access. There is no view corridor. It does not exist in the county's legal records. The murmuring grew louder. Arthur Gable, sitting in the front row, gave a single, emphatic nod. Slide 50200, click. The redacted meeting minutes appeared. The black bars, a stark symbol of concealment. HOA provided evidence, redacted minutes. When I requested the minutes from the meeting where this aesthetic rule was supposedly clarified, this is the document the management company provided. Slide 60115, click. The screen changed to show the same page, but this time, with no black bars. The vote was clearly visible. Motion fails, 2 ayes, 3 nays. Unredacted minutes via state records request, pursuant to state law, David said, his voice cold and precise. I obtained the unredacted version. The minutes show the motion to apply the aesthetic nuisance clause to features not visible from the street was explicitly debated and defeated in a 2-3 vote. The rule was never legally adopted. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to misinterpret a rule. It was another to enforce a rule that had been formally rejected. This was no longer a dispute. It was an exposure of malfeasance. Karen's face was a stony mask, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. The timer showed Joe 045. He could have stopped there. He had won. But he looked across the room and saw Eleanor Gable. He thought of her quiet advice, fight clean. He advanced to his final slide. It was a simple picture of Mrs. Gable's decorative fence around her flower bed. Slide 740. For years, David said, his voice softening, this board, under Mrs. Matthews's leadership, has chosen to selectively enforce some rules while ignoring others, often based on personal animosity. It has pursued non-existent violations against some homeowners while allowing minor, harmless infractions by others, like this fence, to be held over them as a form of leverage. He turned from the screen and looked directly at the board members. The timer read Gio 15. This is not what community looks like. Community is about fixing problems, not manufacturing them. It's about applying rules fairly, not using them as weapons. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for the board to follow its own governing documents and the law. He paused, then added, and, as a final request, I ask the board to work with Mrs. Gable on a simple retroactive variance for her fence, which has been a charming feature of our neighborhood for 20 years. The timer hit 0003, 0002, 0001, 0000. He had finished with no time to spare. He lowered the microphone. My presentation is complete. I ask the board to dismiss violation HOA 2023-114 and rescind all associated fines and threats of lien. David sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, profound, and devastating. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector fan. David's evidence hung in the air, a series of irrefutable, documented facts that had systematically dismantled Karen's entire case, and with it, her authority. Liam, the property manager, was visibly sweating, refusing to make eye contact with Karen. The other board members looked stunned, glancing between David's final slide and Karen's rigid profile. It was Susan, a quiet accountant who served as the board's treasurer, who finally broke the spell. She slowly reached for her microphone, her hand trembling slightly. I believe a motion is in order, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. I move to dismiss violation V 2023-114 against Mr. Jensen, with prejudice. Second, another board member muttered immediately. Karen's head snapped toward them. This is highly irregular. We need to caucus. All in favor, Susan asked. Ignoring her, 4 hands shot up. Karen sat, unmoving, her hand flat on the table. Motion passes, 4-0, with 1 abstention, Susan announced, a new tone of command in her voice. The room erupted in a wave of applause and relieved chatter, but Susan held up a hand for silence. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, looking directly at Karen now, the deference gone, replaced by a cold fury. In light of the evidence presented this evening, which suggests a pattern of misrepresentation of the governing documents, fabrication of easements, and the enforcement of non-existent rules, I move for a vote of no confidence in the presidency of Karen Matthews. Another board member immediately seconded the motion. And, Susan added, her voice ringing with authority, I also move that this board commission a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's records, financials, and contracts for the past 5 years. This time, the room didn't just applaud. People got to their feet. It was a full-blown rebellion. The quiet fear that Karen had cultivated for years had evaporated in 5 minutes, replaced by a surge of collective empowerment. Liam, the property manager, finally spoke, his voice high and strained as he tried to distance his company from the sinking ship. All Pro Community Management wishes to state for the record that we act solely at the direction of the board. Any interpretive discrepancies or enforcement actions are the responsibility of the board itself. We, of course, will cooperate fully with any audit. He was already drafting his company's legal defense in his head. The vote of no confidence passed. Again, 4-0. Karen Matthews, who had walked into the room as the iron-fisted ruler of Oak Creek Preserve, was president no more. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She gathered her papers with a jerky, furious motion, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. Without a word, without a single glance at the community she had so tyrannically claimed to serve, she turned and stormed out of the clubhouse. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing the final, definitive end of her reign. Months later, spring had returned to Oak Creek Preserve. The bitter chill of the fight had given way to a season of renewal, both for the neighborhood and for David. A new, transparent board was in place, with Susan now serving as a reluctant but effective president. The acrimony of the past year had been replaced by a sense of shared purpose. The forensic audit had uncovered what many had long suspected. Karen had been directing landscaping and maintenance contracts to a company owned by her cousin, at inflated prices, likely for a kickback. The financial malfeasance, more than the petty tyranny, was the final nail in her coffin. The Matthews house had been sold in a quiet, off-market deal, and they were gone within a month. David, having earned the deep respect of his neighbors, had been persuaded to join the Architectural Review Committee. He was now on the inside, helping to methodically rewrite the community's rules, stripping them of ambiguity and adding clauses that emphasized fairness and clear, objective standards. The term aesthetic nuisance was struck from the record entirely, replaced with specific, measurable criteria. Mrs. Gable's fence had been granted a variance in the new board's first official act. One cool April evening, David sat in his home office. The audit had produced boxes of old records, and he was sifting through archived board emails, looking for context on a long-forgotten fence regulation. He opened a folder dated 4 years prior, from before he had even moved in. An email chain caught his eye. The subject was offer for 42 Maple Drive. It was a conversation between Karen Matthews and her real estate agent. He read with a growing sense of shock. There it was, in black and white, an offer from Karen and her husband to buy his house. It was a lowball offer, significantly under the asking price. The agent was advising her to increase it, warning her of competing bids. The final email in the chain was from Karen, sent the day after his own offer had been accepted. "I can't believe we lost it." She wrote, "That was supposed to be my house, my dream home, with that perfect backyard, my pool." David leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a sickening click. It had never been about a view corridor or community harmony. It was never about the mailbox or the noise from the pump. It wasn't even, in the end, about power. It was about resentment. She hadn't wanted to preserve a view. She had wanted what she felt was hers. Every violation notice, every public humiliation, every procedural maneuver had been the poisoned fruit of a simple, bitter envy. She couldn't have the pool, so she had tried to ruin his peace in it. The knowledge was not triumphant. It was just sad. He closed the laptop. He walked to the large window and looked out at his backyard. The pool, his sanctuary, shimmered under the rising moon. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was finally, completely, his. He felt the last vestiges of the long, cold fight wash away, leaving only a profound sense of calm. The battle was over. Justice had been served, and the memory of what he and Evelyn had built together was safe at last.